Welcome to the Founders Foyer with me, Aishwarya. This foyer is full of conversations. The space where creators, founders, and builders look for all the support and concepts to grow their ideas into products. Meeting like minded folks from our circles is such a fun thing to do. The way we exchange ideas, talk to each other, get inspired, and use accountability that comes with commitment. These are all the upsides to a great group. Building an idea into a product is so much about cultivating taste in people, going by their motivations, and sort of helping them to belong in a group with similar folks. So, how to bring people together with the right intent, why to build a community, and how to thrive those communities for the long game? I've got just the person to chat about all of this. Ben Lang is a builder and community lead who enjoys bringing people together and helping them find opportunities and interests to work with. He's formerly led Notion's community and was one of the early marketing hires there. Ben loves building stuff, and his side project of building a template gallery with Notion got nearly 70,000 visits per month even before he actually moved to Notion. He is currently building Nextplay, the best way to discover what's next with curated opportunities, gatherings, and content. Hi, Ben. It's so good to have you here with me today.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me on. Happy to be here.
Awesome. Let's start with your Notion template for wedding and home base. You ended up making news on Business Insider's headline and a headshot for NYT. Just leveled up all of you celebdom, I guess. So, what was all the fun and roast about?
For context, I shared how my wife and I were using Notion together, and I just shared a screenshot. And people, I think, had very strong feelings about it. They were either very supportive or very against it. There were a lot of reactions to it, and a lot of tech meme accounts retweeting it and kind of making fun of it. And so it just got a bunch of attention and I thought it was funny. So I just kind of kept on going with it. And I think that just made it more entertaining. So it was a fun ride.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think the best part of the fun ride is I think the way it led you to more opportunities and also like giving you more room to look at, I kind of meet like minded folks here. Some agree, some don't agree. But I think on the whole, it's sort of bringing the same sense as what a community would stand for.
Yeah, totally. I'm all about it.
Yeah. And to me, I think it also reminded me of the time that you and your friends sort of did something similar during COVID times, right? Like you did something called Corona Crash, which was to
Oh
match out
yeah.
folks on dates. It's, do you want to talk about that? I think that sounded so much fun.
Yeah. I think early into COVID, maybe in the first few months, a few friends and I, we started a Facebook group for people to post about their
Mhm.
single friends. And we we just started inviting our friends and it kind of went viral within like our circles. We were only inviting people who were Jewish, like in our religion. And,
Right.
and, within a few years, a few years later now, it's about 25,000 people
Mhm.
and a couple hundred couples have gotten married from it. So it's definitely worked really well and continues to work today, which is really cool to see.
Yeah, I mean, like, I think these are great examples to bring more people together. And I think COVID really brought in that the whole depletion of meeting folks in person and trying to have the more meeting time with folks. And I think all of that is just proving how much we bet on each other's ideas, how much we really go with talking to each other and just getting inspired, right? So that's such a cool thing to do.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Yeah. And I guess the Notion template also got me like started with respect to a lot of people talk about their home edits. They talk about how they use things to sort their day to day activities. And it goes on to most of the hobbies, like let's say gardening or let's say like bookkeeping, a lot of these activities. But it's kind of very cool to see how to maintain a, house base in terms of like having activities shared between you and your wife. And also it's a great way to get things sorted. So I'm glad the few who definitely like, agreed with is all by the side.
Yeah, I genuinely think it's useful and valuable to
Mhm.
people, and I guess maybe people just don't talk about it as much publicly. So maybe that was part of why I think it got some attention. What are the
Right.
behind the scenes of managing a house or managing a relationship, or these things are they're not that they're just not spoken of that much, and there's a lot of things people can learn from each other.
Yeah, no, that's spot on. In fact, I keep chancing upon these tweets often which says like, hey, let's start bringing or normalizing some of the adult chores that we do in terms of, hey, I want something that simplifies my tax calculations. I want something that simplifies the way I organize stuff at home. And often it's maybe also because we relate a lot of these things to work. We kind of say, oh, I have to use these tools because it demands me to use them at work. But I guess, like how you said, you don't talk these things often in public. And when somebody talks about it, you're like, hey, I think somebody's talking my mind and feels like I can really connect with them. So I think it's a very powerful thought that, you just said, not just with respect to templates or just tools as such, but I think the greatest means of connecting people on social media and on the internet is the fact that somebody feels like they belong. Like they feel like, oh, like I hear this person feels like they're talking about me and talking what I really, vibes.
Yeah, yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. So, on these lines, Ben, I want to get things straight first because community as a word has been the most confusingly used one. Because when it comes to people's minds, it's always about networking, finding opportunities, and more of a status signature, right? Because it's mostly like, hey, are you a part of this community? It's so cool. And are you not? And there's like a lot of conversations that happen around it. In the core essence, what brought you into community building and what's something that you think people have still not understood about community?
Yeah, I mean, I was doing these things, I think, before I even knew what that word was. And I think for me, it was just finding ways to bring people together, around
Mhm.
similar interests, similar values. I had a bit, like many years ago, I'd organized, a hackathon before hackathons were cool. I had started a bunch of Facebook groups. I had been hosting events for product times. And so,
Mm.
I was doing these things like 10 years ago when people were, I don't think people were talking about these things as much. And I was just doing it for fun. I mean, I just really enjoyed kind of bringing people together and seeing what would happen. And that was really it.
Yeah.
And I've just continued to do that over time. And, some of those, I think some of these things have morphed into opportunities, morphed into businesses, and that's been fun to see. But I always kind of start with the approach of just like having fun, bringing people together.
Right. Yeah, it sounds more like how you let serendipity kind of decide what the outcomes should end up being, but the overall thing is, yeah, to bring people together. And I think that's a very good catch for what today's folks, especially product builders and founders, who think about community. I kind of feel that sometimes the points that you mentioned always come as secondary for them in the sense that they start really fixating about what would the outcomes look like if I'm going to bring 10 people into the roof, what is it that I exactly want, not thinking about it more from, let's say, the outcomes that you mentioned in terms of like getting opportunities or like trying to just brainstorm and let them engage with each other, but more around metrics and more around stuff that I would rather say don't come primarily. Have you observed something like that? Like where you think folks have gotten like understood the meaning of community in a kind of wrong sense?
I I mean, I always I always think it's good to be careful, in
Mm,
terms of trying to trying to monetize or like extract value or too early. I think like in essence, like building these types of communities is just very hard to
right.
to see value on day one. And I think if you do that, you're at risk of failure pretty early on.
Mm,
That's why I always try to kind of hold off on extracting and taking
right.
and trying to see ROI from whatever I'm building and just kind of holding off as long as I can, because I think the value comes from, the creation of this thing and keeping it as pure as possible and authentic as possible as long as you can.
Right. Like sort of getting the momentum up and high and then figuring out if the values keep going and yeah, I think that's a great way to do it because it's very scrappy. It's like how people would want to build on ideas, right? Like just get it out there, kind of build your first version and see where it goes. I think what you're saying is more like how the version of community goes. Like, get it done, get a few meetups and then figure out the values and how you want to take things forward. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
Absolutely.
And speaking about Notion, and I think you're one of the first few employees from the initial time of the marketing team. And you've spent about 5 years leading the community efforts there. And today, when people talk about building community for software products or for big brands, Notion is often quoted as like the go to example for community growth. So, what was different about it, and what kind of made you identify these super followers or super believers? I think that's how the community of Notion came through, right? So, what made you believe and bet on these early believers, and how was it like to build a community with a software product like that?
Yeah, I mean, I think what was really fun there was I was one of them myself. Like before Azure Notion, I had a website where people could share their Notion templates. I had like I helped start a Facebook group. I was buying Notion domain names. This was before like you could even duplicate templates. Before there were groups about no like there nothing really existed at that point. So I was
Right.
just looking for ways to do this because I really wanted to meet other Notion users and help more people start using Notion. So I think once I realized like, oh, there's a couple other people out there doing similar things who are also like equally as excited, if not more excited about Notion than I am. I think, it just made sense. Like, what would happen if we could bring them together and support them as from the company perspective and just try to put more fuel on that fire. And that was, I think that was what helps us create like this initial ambassador program and, scale that over time.
Mm,
But it really just started for me as like a personal passion.
right. And I think it's also for, at least for software products, people think that it's going to take a long time for them to, for users, anybody who gets started with, to kind of get accustomed to what to do with the app, and also like then spread a word. And often when it comes to like telling another person, like especially inviting your friends, it was not very easy as such until, like, of course, we had these collaborative platforms come into place. I think for Notion, the biggest plus there was the fact that it was easy to share with somebody. It was like kind of easier to bring your friend along. And what was that kind of a, you think as the differentiator what the product had? And how do you think it made it very easy for folks to get adapted? Because I think that was the greatest factor for the community, right? Like to be able to publish something, bring in another person, and kind of keep growing the community.
Yeah, I mean, I think Notion inherently is a viral product because you can collaborate with people, you can publish web pages, you can publish templates. So I think without that, I think would have been a lot harder to do what we did. And there aren't that many products that have that. I think another good example might be like Figma, where you're also collaborating with people, and you can also publish things you're creating in Figma, which is amazing. But most SaaS
Mm,
companies you don't really have that. And also like similar to Notion and Figma, is you're creating things, and you're kind of you know you're you're building things and able to share those with the world in whatever fashion you want.
right.
So I think that's like that's pretty unique and definitely like I think one of the elements that helped Notion grow so fast and helped our community efforts as well like be more successful.
Right. And do you like recall some interesting campaign that you've done as a part of it? Like when you were just building the community, getting more folks aligned on, what was something that you worked on, which I think you really liked it or found it very interesting at that time?
That's a good question. I mean, I I worked on a lot of fun things over over the years. I think and one of the things that I thought was really fun was our first user conference called Block by
Oh,
Block, which
right.
which we worked on and we were just our the idea was like what would happen if we try to put together a global. I think it was just still during COVID, so online, like a global online
Mm,
conference all about Notion,
mhm.
and and we were using Hopin, which I think no longer exists, and 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 it was so fun. I remember I think we got like tens of thousands of people signed up for this conference. People were so excited. I mean, Ocean was still very small then. I mean, I think there were probably like 50 people working at Ocean at this point. And and it was just the energy, like even online was so exciting. It took a few months obviously to plan this and figure this all
Mm.
out. But it was a really like wonderful experience.
Mhm. No, I think the energy definitely like comes off as, you're just sharing about this. And no wonder, because you have so many of the creative minds under one roof. And it would be a great opportunity for them to kind of share things with each other, and like get these ideas rolling.
Yeah, totally. It's fun.
I think one more thing that comes to my mind as we're chatting about this, especially, I keep hearing how templates or the way people published these documents in Notion was one of the earlier signs of understanding that somebody was using the product well. So, just touching back on how do you believe or how do you find those early active users? So, do you think templates was like one major thing that brought folks onto Notion? And if at all there are like other signals, kind of how do you spot them? Because you worked at building this community, and for somebody who's actually looking at growing the community of their product, what kind of signals or like how would you suggest that they look after the active folks that they need to focus on and sort of build from there?
Yeah, I mean, early on, I just spent a lot of time looking at people who were talking about Notion on Twitter, on YouTube,
Hmm.
on TikTok, whatever, wherever, even when I was still very small. And I even would go into, our intercom and look at users who had the most activity in Notion and try to see who had the most followers and,
Right.
and our cities that we were trying to expand our ambassador program in and reach out to them. So
Hmm.
it was pretty scrappy early on, just kind of
Right.
doing a lot of digging around, talking to people, DMing people, reaching out to people, sending out email campaigns, whatever it might be for, the community side. I mean, I think like another day, Notion, like we mentioned before, Notion is a very viral product. So yeah, that I think it helped Notion a lot because there was always
Hmm.
this this growing top of funnel, people hearing about Notion, signing up for Notion. And those people would then, at some point maybe hear about the community, get involved. If they want to learn more, go to an event, join a group, ask questions, whatever it might be. And so, it kind of create
Right.
this flywheel,
Yeah.
which I think was, very, very impactful.
Yeah, no, that's very crucial. And you're right about the product powering the community, because folks often think the other way around, where, they can build the product first and then figure out how do you do the community as a wrapper around and find out ways and like do campaigns. But I guess in this case, it's also like treating both as side by side, more like a parallel thing where the product powers the community and the community hence both comes together because of the product.
Totally.
Yeah, yeah, that's true. And in fact, now that you're talking about these different YouTube, TikTok, I think you did influencer marketing even before it was a bit too cold, right? Because most of them today, they kind of like spend a lot. And whenever you talk to people about influencer campaigns, they think, hey, I need to be spending like lots of money and I need to have like a very high value customer and budget to get that started. But when you said it's all scrappy and we started with just reaching out to folks and getting them to just believe in the products such as Notion for tech products, what did it take to make that work, especially with working with YouTube or TikTok and most of these latest tools and platform creators? What was the planning looking like, and what were some of the campaigns that you ran with these folks? Because I'm so interested in the behind scenes of that.
Yeah. So for the first few years, yeah, I was working on that, and our theory was that people talking about Notion, people who use Notion themselves, if they would talk about how they use Notion, that would,
Mm,
we would see some, pretty hopefully impactful results from that, and we definitely tried out a bunch of things, and I think over time just realized that the organic video, like the real videos of people using Notion, even when they were paid, were incredibly impactful, and we saw a really great ROI on them. So what we did was we just started. I mean, very, very early on, I just started reaching out to like a couple YouTubers I saw and mentioned Notion, and we just asked them like, "Hey, would you want to produce a full video about Notion? We'll pay you." And then, you know, do that. We continued to do that over time, and eventually, as that pool maybe dried up, we just started emailing as many creators as we could, saying, "Hey, like Ben here from Notion. We'd love to
mm,
work with you. Are you familiar with Notion? Let us know." And like a lot of the time they wouldn't be, and they weren't. We would just tell them like, "Yeah, no worries. We'll give you a premium account. Like, let's follow up
mm,
in a few months from now and see how it's going." And so, we would follow up 3 months
right.
later, and a lot of the time they would be really excited because they had been using Notion, they loved it, and now they wanted to work with us. So that just kind of continued to expand over time, and hired contractors to help scale this, and eventually we ended up hiring someone full time to to focus on this. But it became a really meaningful channel for Notion.
Yeah, and I can imagine how this would add on to a lot of what people today call is the video SEO, right? Like how all of these videos rank on YouTube, like when you search for a certain product, most of these original voices come up. I think that's a great idea. And I loved it when you said, hey, if somebody says that they haven't used, it's kind of, you make that friction path go away where you're just giving them the product for free and asking them to try along and then, getting a hang of it. I think that's a great tactic for folks who are just listening to how do you grow your community and how do you like work on these influencer programs.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. What was one striking thing for you in as a takeaway from all of these, influencer programs and such? Because I think, like I was just telling you, you folks did it even before it was like properly, I would say, structured, or as today that you have like a separate hire done for it and all that. When you started Scrappy, what was like one major takeaway for you from doing all of this?
I mean, I think a good takeaway was you don't really need to have a large budget to do this. Like we started with a very small budget, and you don't
Mm,
need to be some large company to. A lot of the best campaigns we did were with small YouTubers or medium-sized YouTubers or packages we would do with like a couple of videos with a TikToker,
all right.
and you really don't need a lot to get started. So I just think it's such a under leveraged channel for startups, and there's just so much opportunity there.
Yeah, no, this sounds so much fun. I'm just gonna like double in on that, Ben, because I like the way you said, like, it doesn't take a lot of budget. And for most folks, like I said, often when it comes to working with influencers, they think it's actually going to take them a lot of budget or they think they're not making so much revenue as yet to invest in it. What's your take there? I mean, like, do you really have to, let's say you're a very early on startup and you really think in the power of virality, is it okay to be like working with some of these creators, especially when you don't have like revenue full on as yet? And what does it look like to kind of like shape the way that they create these videos? Because the folks that we're talking about are mainstream creators and maybe they could or they could not do it the same way you would expect them to do. So what was that process like? Can you walk us through, what it really took to get like a video in full swing and the budget or whatever involved in it?
Yeah. So I mean, it definitely varied. It depends on how large their following is. So it can go
Mm,
from small amount of money to very large amount of money. I think when you're
right.
small, you want to start with obviously the smaller budget, and that's what we did too. It was very reasonable starting off, and what we would do is we would just reach out to this YouTuber, Instagram, TikTok, or whatever it might be, and just say like, hey, maybe saw you mention Notion, or maybe maybe you're using Notion. Maybe we found them in our database and saw that they're using Notion. Like, we'd love to partner with you. I think reaching out cold is hard if they don't really know what you're
Hmm.
doing. Over time, got easier as people knew what we were doing. But early on, that's why we really tried to focus on people who maybe were using Notion or heard or mentioned it, and we would ask them like, hey, what would it look like to work together on a video, and they would propose a price. We would negotiate on that. We'd come up with a
Hmm.
contract, sign the contract, send out. They would send us the deliverables when they're ready, publish it, and then we would give them a UTM link so we could track signups from that.
Right.
And that was it really. And it was just kind of building that into a machine over time.
Hmm. Right. Yeah, I think it starts off like how you said, being very scrappy about it, like not having a set and set process, but eventually it leads you to bring more in the pipeline. And today, I think that's the whole game, right? Like you go to YouTube and you search for most of these products. The the way the videos come up is how I and you talk about, hey, I found this cool app. It kind of works. I loved experimenting with it. It's nice to hear original voices and it's nice to see and feel what people really share about a tool. So thanks for sharing that example. And I think it's very relatable to most of them who build out products today and who want to be working with some of these creators.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. And to touch upon this concept of community and just go deeper into these channels, right? I also hear this thought that comes with most of us chatting in the founder circle or like, people who just are starting to build a brand. There's just often pressure about hey, I have to keep talking about my brand. I have to keep talking about myself on different channels. Like, go all in on all the channels, like we're talking about Instagram, TikTok, LinkedIn, Twitter, all of these places. But it's also kind of hard to keep up the pace. And especially when you want to build a community, you can't keep finding and searching for it everywhere, right? So, from your observations, what are the top three things, or, like I would say, like the observations that you found to work for the community, but not going in all the platforms, but very specific to how people can choose their own game.
I think it's I think it's best to just kind of double down on what's working. So if there's like a channel that's working well, or if there's, a program that you're building on the community side that's working well, like I would just try to kind of double down on those. Like for us, for Notion, I think YouTube was a really powerful channel for us as a marketing tool. So we really like doubled down
Mm,
on that. And, for our ambassador program, we built that in Slack and Notion because like a lot of these people in the program already use Slack and obviously we're using Notion. So it just made sense for us to kind of, I mean, it was an invite only program, but it made sense for us to kind of consolidate all of that in one place. So I think you really want to just cater towards where you think, your users, your fans, your customers will get the most value and then just kind of spend the most time on those channels.
right. And early on, it's kind of easier to catch these signals and see, okay, here's where I'm getting more value. Here's where I'm getting more folks to talk about my product. So I'm going to go deeper with respect to this. But let's say as you keep growing your community, especially for a product like Notion or say Figma and so many other products that have this power of community, as it grows bigger, how do you keep it self sustaining? Like, of course, there's going to be like a community team holding on to it and working it through. But what aspects do you think would work better as this community keeps growing larger and bigger? And what's your take there?
There's this question of like, should you centralize things or keep things decentralized? And that's kind of, I think, on a case by case basis. Like with Notion, we decided to keep things decentralized mostly. And,
Right.
I think it's comes with a lot of benefits, but also there's downsides to it. And some
Mm,
companies will try to keep things very centralized and have one place only where
mm,
your community engages. And it's, I think the main things are for in terms of it being decentralized, it's more authentic, it's more available in more languages, more international. It's more, I think, more potential for virality and to grow faster. On the downside, though, you don't really have any data. You have less control.
mm,
You have brand issues. And then for things that are more centralized, for communities that are more centralized, you have the control. You have the data. You can
mm,
kind of less risk involved. But the downside is it's less. Uh, I think less authentic, less
right.
international, global feeling. And I think, maybe more capped, also because you're maybe not leveraging platforms people are already using. So it's more capped in terms of like how viral or how much it can grow. So at the
Right.
end of the day, it's a pretty tricky decision. I think you
Yeah.
kind of have to decide on your own where you think, and the decentralized approach only works if people really love your product and are willing to do that, right? Like there has to be a lot of existing love for that to make sense. If not, people aren't going to
Mm.
want to create communities about your product.
No, you're absolutely right. And it kind of trickles down to maintaining that trade off. And I think in this case, what I hear a lot is how you folks chose to stick to principles of what you want Notion users to really feel like, and how do you want them to use the product? What should they get at the end of it? And I think that's exactly what would work for each person, the way they see the product and the way they want the users to feel about the product when they get their hands on. So I do agree that it comes with a lot of challenges to solve for. So, which actually makes me more curious. When you folks started off these community efforts full swing, what were the outcomes? Or like we're talking about how it's very difficult without data, and it's very difficult in terms of like the metrics that you really want to zero down to. What was your success in measurement like? Because at the end of the day, for running a team and for getting these campaigns and ads and a lot of these other efforts and initiatives going on, there's some sort of measurement that you would do, right? And in your case, I'm curious to understand, for a successful, healthy community like this, what was your fuel and what was it really like to measure the outcome?
Yeah, I mean, we did a couple things. Like first, we would track things on our. We kind of like broke it down into different programs. So each
Hmm.
program we were kind of measuring differently. Um,
Okay.
to give you an example, like with the decentralized communities people are building around Notion. So what we would do there is we would track every month how much they were growing, and and we would kind of be able to group that by region, by language, and for us that was just a really helpful signal to understand like where these decentralized communities, which ones were more successful, which ones were less successful. With our ambassador program, it was a little different and more so like tracking how many folks in the program were active and what
Mm.
types of and also kind of keeping track of like the types of contributions they were bringing or creating for the community and it's that might be a little harder to quantify, but I think our general belief was that these folks who were creating content and running YouTube channels and running communities and running events, right? Like for us, we obviously were getting a tremendous amount, from that, and we wanted to make sure they were happy and excited to be a part of that. So for us being able to track, how what percentage was active was like a good signal in terms of
Mm.
how successful this program was as we continue to onboard more people over time.
Yeah, but that's a fantastic point, and also more because Notion was kind of the product where the team alone didn't make money, but then you empowered creators to make money. So I remember like folks used to kind of, and you also, Ben, I think you've also published a lot of templates that people used to purchase. And there was like a very early sign of monetizing what you built. And I kind of like this, you know, behavior, or I would say more like a value that you help creators believe in early on, that hey, there's something that I can make and I can like monetize it. I can make this value find more power users and more people to believe in. I think that's a great way, and I'm glad that that becomes one of your signs of measure is how much do you make the creators empowered and what do they make out of this, and that's actually a very good value metric to measure.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So, in fact, this takes me back to your journey in terms of coming into Notion, right? Because when I read about it, when I got to know about it, I kind of felt like, hey, this is like a perfect example of show and don't tell, because you've built, a site that had so many Notion gallery templates, and you had folks purchasing your templates, and you had this steady kind of follower gang going on. And also, it was one way for the Notion team to kind of see you and see that, hey, this person's like really passionate about the product. And that eventually got you into meeting the team and then getting the opportunity to lead the community. And this is, to me, this looks like a clear form of how hiring is often made today, which is very, very away from the conventional setup. So, what are your thoughts on how today's builders can find opportunities that they want to go after? Because you're clearly like a good example of how you found your own opportunity.
Yeah, I would say like the two things for me are just being curious, and I spend a lot of time on product hunt and Twitter and just seeing what people are up to and
Mm.
just kind of being curious about things. And the second thing is just having fun. Like when I find something that I think is fun to like spend time on or go deeper on, and I just do it. Like I don't really hold back. And I end up just kind of enjoying that. And I've been trying to be more public about it. So I've been tweeting a lot of just random thoughts recently and ideas and things I'm working on. And some of them might seem ridiculous, but I think that I'm just having fun.
Like, be willing to put these things out there. It's okay if it sounds crazy. I think, yeah, yeah, sure.
Yeah, totally. I mean, I think the template was a good example. Like the wedding one.
Mhm.
Like I didn't really think that much would
Mhm.
happen with it, but then I was just like, I'm gonna lean into this and publish more templates and start a YouTube channel about
Mhm.
this and just kind of keep going with it.
Yeah, I think this is like it reminds me of the time when somebody blogged about date me document. Like they created a Google
Yeah.
Doc and they kind of put like, why here are reasons why you should be dating me, and that went crazy and viral. And I often do this like when a couple of us like we speak about some of these funny ideas. I guess there's this all roots back to how people crave for connections, and people would really give up anything to meet others in a real life setting and get some of these initial barriers to communicate, I would say, moved out of the picture. So start that YouTube channel. I think it sounds more fun, and it's I guess I'm pretty sure that's going to give you more of the viral opportunities than what got you featured on New York Times.
100%.
So this what also got you into Nextplay? Because before this recording, we were just chatting about how I found you, and to me, like I first chanced upon your profile through Nextplay. I really love the concept, and it's very curious, right? Like the same curiosity that you said in terms of wanting to explore more was kind of reflected there, where Nextplay became like the space that people can use to find other people, to find good catch ups, opportunities, networking, all of these aspects. So, is it what brought you into Nextplay in the first place? Because it's a very feel at home vibe, and it's so wonderful to meet so many builders across the globe. I would love for you to share more on this project that you're building.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. I think with that, I mean, I've just always been interested in this idea of like what's next. And I think a lot of people just don't talk about it. And, it's very hard to navigate that. I've been through it many times in my life where I was like, what am I doing next? What is going on? Being confused, feeling lost. And so it started off with these events, people just
Mm,
coming together. I keep them very curated and make them feel very intimate and give people a space to like talk about what they wanted to do next. And then, from there, and then, what's been neat is we've found a bunch of people in other cities who wanted to host next play events. So now they're happening in
right.
a bunch of places.
Oh,
And
like what are these places?
oh, like New York, London, Boston, Austin, Bangalore,
Wow.
Paris. Yeah, so it's really cool to see that. And so, just kind of been doubling down on that and sending out a newsletter every 2 weeks with like opportunities from all of these events and people joining a podcast, interviewing people, just talking about how they
Mm,
figured out what to do with their lives and just a whole bunch of things around that. So it's something kind of that just came from, my own personal desires to talk about this and, I think has now evolved into something that's hopefully helping a lot more people.
yeah. Yeah, this is a lot more fun. It gives people a chance to speak about what's really been interesting for them. And that's what I think, rooting back to what we spoke in the initial time, not more people speak about things. And speaking really gives a sense of wanting to belong, wanting to, kind of be there and agree with others. So I'm glad you're doing Next Play, and I've been loving this project. I've been following the newsletter for a while now. It made me meet new friends. So I connected with two, three of the folks through the newsletter. We had like a good Zoom call a couple of weeks ago, and it's really helpful in building friendships as well. So yeah, thanks for doing
That's so
that.
cool. Yeah, I love hearing that.
Yeah, I can't wait to attend one of these in real time meetups. I think I should definitely check out the one in Bangalore for sure. So yeah.
Yeah,
So
definitely.
yeah. And what's next for Next Flame? Like what's coming up in this project and what's exciting you these days?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're like just kind of keep growing it, keep the newsletter going, keep the podcast, like keep growing the podcast, more events. Like I think we're doing a
Mhm.
lot now, and now I'm just trying to figure out how to like continue to build it out because it's a lot of different things. So I'm excited about that. I'm still new to hosting podcasts, so that's a whole new world for me. And yeah, it's really fun.
Yeah, for sure. And don't worry, I think you will find your way with the podcast. It's just crazy as how you and I are just sitting and chatting about all under the roof. But yeah, I think it's great. And I saw your lineup of guests. I think it's a great start, and it's only going to get better with time.
Yeah, I appreciate that.
Cool. So as we come to the end of the session, it's just been super good hosting you, Ben. From discussing what was really exciting you from the Notion days to the next play, I guess now there's a lot of meaning around how do you build communities and what's really like to bring people together on one roof. And for me, you're one of the folks, very few folks that I've met who's been doing this in a very great fashion, because you give more reflection and room for people to share what it means for them to get excited about their ideas. So keep doing that. And for the folks who wish to connect with you or who wish to find new opportunities, Do you have something to tell them? Do you have something for them to reach out to you?
Yeah, sure. I think the best is just go to my website, benlang.me, and my Twitter, LinkedIn, Nextplay, all those links are there. So that's probably the best.
Yes, I'll make sure to put them on the show notes too. And yes,
Perfect.
thank you so much, Ben. Once again, it's fantastic having you on the show and discussing everything about community. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.